We're talking today with David Zylstra of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now Dave, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Grand Rapids in 1924,
Okay.
and I've lived in Grand Rapids all of my life. I attended Westside Christian School, and I went from there to Calvin College, and from there to Brooklyn College, and from there to Biarritz University in France, and from there to the University of Michigan.
All right, now that's jumping ahead just a little bit, because you did not do all of that before the war. You did some of it.
I'm sorry.
You did not do all of that before the war.
No.
No. So to go back a little bit, what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
Okay, my dad, I'm one of 8 children, and my dad built a shop in the backyard at 1233 Muskegon Avenue, and he was a sheet metal worker, and he made a living all the time. He built a house in front after he built the shop, and the shop and the house are still there at 1233 Muskegon. And all of us children were brought up in that area, and then of course we left for the war, and after the war we got married and had our own families. But we were a very fine family, and we came through the Depression with flying colors, I would say, compared with some of the families that were near us.
Right.
And my father was just an ordinary worker. He came from the old country in 1892 at 4 years old, and began that business. He started his work at age 12, and he borrowed a pair of long trousers from his brother, my uncle, so that he could get a job in a furniture factory here. So we're Grand Rapids, I would say, brought up in Grand Rapids.
Certainly. Okay. Now, do you remember how? Let's see. Now, before Pearl Harbor happened, do you remember hearing much about the war in Europe or that kind of thing?
Well, there was isolationists, and Roosevelt was an isolationist.
No, he
at
wasn't.
one time. Oh no, excuse me. Who was the other fellow that was against it? Long
Well,
story.
lots of people were.
Yeah, but the Congress was split on it, let's say, and we weren't going to get involved. We did build planes for Great Britain, and we supplied them with a lot of things, but we did not want to get involved. However, December 7 of 1941, it changed people's mind overnight. We were attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, and we all got together with one purpose. Let's
Right.
get this war over with, beat them, and go back to work.
So my question is, World War II, when Pearl Harbor happens, you're in high school at that point, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But before Pearl Harbor, did you know very much about what was happening maybe over in Europe?
Well, yes. When Hitler overtook Poland and some of these other little countries in there, it scared us because we could see the trend, but we couldn't do anything about it.
Right.
And we were wondering how far he was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a mystery and still a very funny feeling, let's say, afraid feeling that we had in America about what Hitler was doing over there. And some of us had the suspicion, and rightly so, that he was going to overtake the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he started to do, of course, when he overran all these countries.
Did your father still have any contact with relatives back in the Netherlands, or was he kind of on his own over here?
Not any contacts. No, not any. Not that we wrote to and had conversation with him. No.
Okay. Now, how did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
I was coming out of church, and my cousin said to me, "Hey, did you hear the news?" I said, "What news?" And he said, "Pearl Harbor." I said, "Where is Pearl Harbor?" And I said, what happened? And, well, the Japanese attacked. And then I turned the radio on when I got home, and it was all over the radio, day and night for a few days there, because that was a very serious thing. Pearl Harbor turned our minds completely. We had to get together and beat these three people.
Hmm.
The guy from Italy, the guy from Germany, and the guy from Japan.
Okay. Now, at this point, and how old were you at that time?
Well, when I first started to think about it, I was 15 because someone told me that you're probably going to end up in the Army. And we thought about it. We were at a camp, a summer camp. And the leader told us at that time, I think this was probably when France was overtaken, and then
Well, France fell in 1940 already.
well, we were kids.
Hmm.
I was in camp,
Yeah.
and he was right because I think it was 3 or 4 years afterwards, and we were in the Army.
Hmm.
So we had no choice, but it was coming slowly, and it was in our minds. It was a concern about everybody in America, what was going to happen. But again, there was a lot of sentiment about that's your war over there, and we're over here, so don't bother us, see,
Right.
until Pearl Harbor. That changed the whole complexion of thinking.
Now, before you entered the service, were you involved in any of the home front activities? You know, they did paper drives and scrap drives and things like that.
Oh, yes, they had war bonds. They sold war bonds, and that was very widely advertised. And we all felt very much of a part of it. And yes, we did. My dad bought some war bonds. And then we had victory gardens during the war. Everybody, not everybody, but several people made gardens in their backyard, which they hadn't had before. And we grew vegetables right there in our own place. Victory gardens were common. Yeah.
And you also had rationing at that time?
Yes, it was rationing. I think we were allowed a pound of meat a week or something. I forget now exactly, but it was gasoline was rationed too. In fact, it was rationed after the war also. So I can remember after the war, maybe 3 or 4 years, we still couldn't get enough gasoline. But then there was a lot of black market, some black market meats. And you didn't know about that, but some people that had a little, we had an experience, for example, a fellow on the west side had a little slaughterhouse behind the houses, and he did his own thing back there. And the rumor was that he was dealing in little black market meat. So it was not common, but I was a kid. And I didn't hear about this until after the war. But everybody was rationed for a lot of things. Sugar was rationed, coffee, and those were things that you couldn't get. They sent stuff like chocolate to us overseas, the Red Cross, and they sent it to some of the prisoners of war that they could have addresses for. Yes.
Okay.
A lot of rationing going on during the war.
Now, when did you wind up entering the service, and how did that play out?
Well, I was in Calvin College, and I graduated from Christian High in '42, then I went to Calvin, and at Calvin College, the atmosphere was very much warlike. We knew that eventually we were all going to get caught. In fact, it was quite an experience. I was deferred during that semester, and I walked downtown because I had to take a bus home from Calvin. And I was 17, 18 in that time. And when I'd go down the street meeting another guy about my age, I'd turn around and look at him, and I found that he was looking at me too. The question was, how come you're here, not in the Army or Navy or Marines? It was a funny feeling. I can remember that a couple times because, I was deferred until I finished that semester.
Okay. Now, did you consider enlisting, or?
Yes, that was a common thing. Shall we enlist or shall we wait till we get drafted? And again, the reason why I got drafted is because I wanted to finish as much as I could at Calvin. But right after Pearl Harbor, for example, I had a couple buddies who joined. They left college and joined immediately a week or two after the Pearl Harbor incident. So there was a lot of that. In fact, some of the stations, Army recruiting stations, where people were lined up to get into the Army. And I remember that one, I forget where it was now, but there were some people waiting there in chairs, waiting to get signed up, see? I had a brother who signed up, and he enlisted for 3 years with the Air Force, and yeah, I just waited.
Okay. So when did you actually enter the service?
I entered the service in August of 1943,
Okay. And where did you report to first?
Fort Custer,
Okay.
Fort Custer, Michigan.
Right, in Battle Creek.
Battle Creek.
Okay. And was that just for processing?
Yes.
Okay. So where did they send you for basic training?
From there on, they sent us to Fort Benning, Georgia, the infantry school. And I smelled a rat right there, but anyway, I didn't want to become an engineer. But they, some of my buddies were there from Calvin, and a couple of them became doctors. But they had to have 1 year of pre-med before the Army would take them into the medical program.
Mm-hmm.
But they stayed, they had to stay for I think 4 years. But then they got a medical degree while they were in the service, because we were short of doctors at the time. And that was a big program in the ASTP.
Okay. Now, can you explain what the ASTP program was?
Yes, it's called the Army Specialized Training Program, and the Navy had a V5 program, I think it was. And it was designed to get people who were in the upper, let's say upper grades. I think they took only those who got the top 50% of the people who took the test were given a card. They sent us a card, and they said, when you get into the service, show this card because it proves that you passed the AST entry exam. And then from there on, while you were at the Army's command, let's say. But we had no control once we got in. It was just, but we were in the service with some beautiful, brilliant people, really. Very outstanding people at basic training and all through training too.
Okay. Now, where in the sequence, because you were in the ASTP program for a while, and was that right after was that before Fort Benning or after Fort Benning?
No, that was before Fort Benning.
Okay.
I got my card from
Right.
the government, ASTP, and I wanted to join the Army rather than the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And they both had a program. And at that time, the Air Force was part of the Army.
It was, yes.
And we had, there was no separate entity as the Air Force. But I did want the Army. And so then I took the test and passed the test, and I got the card, went to Fort Custer, and from there I went to Fort Benning for 17-week basic. And from there on, we went as recruit replacements.
Okay. But you're still kind of skipping over the ASTP part. Did you go to Fort Custer before or after you did the ASTP?
After I took the test.
Okay, so you go from Fort Custer, but then you were in Brooklyn College at some point, right?
Well, from basic training, yes. We went from basic training, 17 weeks of basic. We were sent to colleges.
Right, okay.
And we had 3 programs, of course. One was the medical, one was the engineering, and one was the linguistics. And the linguistics was filled immediately right away, and then that was cut out. So the only one left was engineering for us.
Okay.
For me.
All right, so you did do the basic training before you went to Brooklyn College?
Yes.
Okay, so now tell me a little bit about the basic training. First of all, how did they get you from Battle Creek down to Fort Benning?
Oh, yeah, that was by train, troop train. And those were a dime a dozen. I mean, troop trains were all over, and just that's how we got around. There were no Air Corps that would take us at that time. There was no air industry like we have today. The steam engines were very, very popular and very, very useful. And we had troop trains that went from Fort Custer all over the country, because some of my buddies who got in there went to Custer, and from there they went to Texas or Alabama or California, and yeah, wherever they needed people, they sent them by troop train.
Okay. Now, how long did it take to get down to Fort Benning?
From Grand Rapids?
Yeah, well, or from Battle Creek or wherever.
From Battle Creek. I don't recall that. I don't recall, but it was the fastest trip. It might have taken a couple of days because that's 800 miles, 750 or 800 miles.
Well,
So I
would you have
imagine
to?
It took 2 days.
Right. Would you have to stop to wait for other trains to go by and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was fun because people were always waving at us, and the country was very much for what was going on as far as the purpose that we were in the Army for. We were to save our country,
Mm-hmm.
and we were trying to get all these guys out of the way, Hitler and Hirohito and
Right. Okay. Now, when
Mussolini.
when you got down to Fort Benning, then, what kind of reception did you get?
Well, as I recall, it was these were Army regulars, and the sergeant were tough. You know, they were going to train us to be obedient and useful and learn what we were supposed to learn on time and have clean clothes put on every day. Get up at 6 o'clock every morning after the morning troop bugle. It was quite a life. It was a different life, of course, but that was good training because we had to be one of all for one, and we had a couple of people there that I still remember. You know, that were very, very brilliant, and we would learn. We had to learn to march. I think we had to march 15 miles in one day for our last, let's say, the long march. And then we had to do that with one canteen of water. And we couldn't stop and get water on the way. And some of the drips couldn't understand that. And they got rid of the water the first couple hours. And they were begging for water in the afternoon through 2 or 3 o'clock because they didn't have any water left. See. But then the talk was how much I'd give you $5 for a Coke right now if I could get a Coke. See, not 5 cents like it used to be.
Right.
Those are the days, yeah.
Okay. Now, how did they enforce discipline?
Pardon?
How did they enforce discipline when you were training?
Well, it was very good discipline. Either we did this or we had to go on KP or we had it was I got to tell you a little story. We were at this one place, and we were all new recruits, and we got lined up, and the sergeant came in. He said, "I need some guys. Does any of you guys drive a Buick?" Oh, 4 or 5 guys rolled their hands. So he brought us around to the back, and here's 5 wheelbarrows. It said Buick on the wheelbarrows. Okay, guys, let's get to work. We gotta move.
Right.
But anyways, that's kind of a trick. But
Never volunteer.
Yeah.
All right. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life in the Army?
It was very difficult, I would say. We were, we slept between 2 sheets all the time before we got there, and we still did at Fort Benning too. We had bunks, and we had foot lockers, which we kept our stuff in. But it was orderly. It was nice. We had 2-story barracks buildings, It was very nice. I got to tell you a little story. It's funny. The guys used to go out Saturday and they would get drunk and come back after midnight, and they'd turn the lights on in the barracks and they'd shake the beds to wake us all up. See, they had too much to drink, so we didn't know what to do there. We didn't know what to do except one guy said, "Let's fix them." So we turned all the fuses out of all the lights in the building, and we staggered our footlockers in the aisleway, and you never heard such noise when they came home as they did that night. But they never bothered us again, see.
All right, so you took care of that problem yourself.
Pardon?
You took care of that problem yourself.
Well, I was part of the gang, let's say,
Right. Okay, now the group that you had, were a lot of them guys like you who were going to go to ASTP and a little bit older, or were there a lot of kids?
In basic training, we were all ASTP.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you were all a little too smart for your own good anyway.
Many of those are guys with a year or 2 of college,
Okay.
So they were brilliant kids. Some of them were very brilliant. In fact, some of them ended up as professors at large universities.
It happens. Okay, so you spend 17 weeks there,
17 weeks.
and then you go up to Brooklyn College. So roughly when did you get to Brooklyn College?
When did I get there?
When did you get there, yeah?
Well, it was, let's see, 17 weeks would put us in after the first of the year, wouldn't it?
Yep.
I think we got there probably in the beginning of the year, yeah.
Okay.
I don't recall exactly.
So early 1944, basically.
Yes.
Okay. And then how long did you stay at Brooklyn College? Just one term?
They
Or?
dropped, yes, one term. They dropped the program. And I often wondered whether the purpose of that ASTP program was to save the colleges because there were no students there. And of course, the Army furnished thousands and thousands of students to many of the major colleges throughout the country. So, and it was a very important thing, I would think, for the colleges as well, because they wouldn't have made it for 3 years without any male students. But being a 4F, you understand the 4F is? 4F is deferred because of your physical condition. A lot of guys were 4F because they had foot problems or some health problems, and you couldn't tell it, but they had a card that proved that they weren't going to be 1A.
Right. Okay. Now, what was life like for you while you were at Brooklyn College? I mean, what did you do every day?
Well, we had regular programs and regular professors that were teaching the program. In fact, there was an engineering program, and all of us got a degree for the program, but we finished the requirements of the program, but then they cut the program off, and the captain called us one day and said, "Boy, you're going to have to go back to your original outfits." Original outfits? We didn't have any original outfits, some of us. We just had infantry basic. So you can imagine what happened to us. We went in as infantry replacements in different colleges or different organizations throughout the country. But we happened to go down to Fort Benning. From Fort Benning, we went to Brooklyn College, and from Brooklyn College, we went to maneuvres in Louisiana and Texas with the 75th Division.
Okay.
And that's how I got started with the 75th Division.
Now, to go back, so Brooklyn College, that is in Brooklyn, New York, right?
Brooklyn, New York.
So it's New York City. Now, did you get to see any of New York City while you were there?
Oh yes, on weekends. Weekends we could go out and do what we wanted to, but not during the week. We studied, and it was we were given full programs. No monkeying around.
Right.
Mathematics and that's right, physics. Yeah, it was a good program really. Okay. And Brooklyn was a college that was owned by the city of New York, one of 5 colleges I think, and it was a very fine college. I have to admit. I didn't think so when I first went there, because some of my buddies went to University of Michigan, Penn State, and those kinds of places. But not us. We ended up at Brooklyn College.
Okay. So you do that for one term and you get through that, and now you go off and you join the 75th Division. Okay. And then
Yes.
which regiment did they assign you to?
I was in the 291st Regiment,
Okay.
and we got assigned to M Company, and there were heavy machine guns, water-cooled machine guns, and heavy mortars, 81 millimeter mortars. And then we were attached, usually in combat, to the line company. Whichever company was on the attack, as heavy weapons, we would be assigned, some just platoons only to certain companies, but we had to go with the attacking company.
Okay. Now, within the weapons company, were you assigned to a specific platoon or to the headquarters, or what were you doing?
Well, we were all trained, of course, I was on a gunner. I was a gunner, and then, of course, we had a couple. See, when we got there, all the positions of sergeants and they were taken by trainees, you might say, because the 75th Division was organized only 2 years before that, and then they had these guys in training all the time, waiting to go overseas.
Right.
We didn't know what was going on. We were going to either go east or west, and we always talked about where we were going to go after we had our training, and we didn't know. Even when we finished our maneuvers in Louisiana, we we thought might go to the Pacific, but instead we went to Europe.
Okay.
And we went to New York from there, and we embarked from there.
Tell me a little bit about the maneuvers themselves. So what kind of country were you in and what were you doing?
Maneuvers in this country?
Yeah.
Well, the maneuvers were in Texas, right on the border of Texas and Louisiana. And we had rain for 3 weeks, I think. In fact, we had a very interesting thing. There were two parts, the Reds and the Blues. And the Reds were the enemy and the Blues were the good guys. But we were going to keep the record. The line was right here and we couldn't get that. And we had to watch out because these are the maneuvers now. But anyway, we couldn't get the food in one night. So they left the food from the night to the next morning. And we saw the ham, and the ham was turned colors already. And we thought, oh, that's good. We haven't had anything to eat since last noon. So we ate that stuff, and we got sick. I think the whole company got sick, and it was maybe a half an hour before it started. But we had ambulances, and we had to set up an emergency hospital there because we probably had 100 guys that were sick with poisoning, food poisoning. Anyway, that was part of the maneuvers.
Lovely. Okay. Now, was the country? What was the countryside there like? Was it hills or swamp or what was it?
It was swampy there on the edge. Yeah, it was at a river. I can't think of the name of the river, but this was 70 years ago, so I don't remember all of it. But
now, did you have to worry about snakes and things like that?
yeah, we got a lot of ticks. We had to watch out for ticks, and we slept outside. See, they gave us a full fill pack, thinking of a blanket and a coat. No, we didn't get coats here. Overseas, we got the overcoats.
Okay. All right. So, and how long did you spend doing that? How many weeks was that?
I think it was about 10 weeks, but we got there probably the second week.
Okay.
And then we had to go through the training. And the training was, we were trained before that, of course, at Fort Benning, but it was tough. First you get to sleep between two sheets in a nice troop train. The next day you're on the ground. See, you had a blanket over you and you had a couple of rocks for a pillow,
Yeah.
It was a little different,
Okay.
but it was good training, really. It was to toughen you up,
And did they also give you training on the heavy weapons now? So you trained on the machine guns and the mortars?
Yes. And we had, in fact, we had to shoot these mortars and machine guns, and we had to go over. They had one example, for example, they had live ammunition, and we had to crawl under those guns for 100 yards, I think it was, on our hands and knees, just to prove that we could stand the noise. But we had some. Maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but we were always trying to shoot these mortars and see if we could do them fast. And we'd have these things were 15 inches long, these mortars. But anyway, one of the guys put the mortar in there before the first one came out. And the gun went about 30 feet ahead, and we had our own guys there. See, we were shooting the mortars over the front lines.
Right.
And one of the guys got hit pretty bad and never did go overseas with us. He became our buddy. We still contacted him for our reunions after the war, but he was hurt pretty bad.
Yeah, well, accidents happen in training.
Accidents happen.
It
It was
does
a
happen.
stupid thing.
Yeah.
And nobody ever would tell who did it, see. But we had an idea who it was.
Okay. Now, when the maneuvers were over, did you go back to a base camp, or did you just get on trains and leave?
We went to Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky from there. And we had more training. And regular Army rules, up at 6 o'clock and KP and all that stuff.
Okay. Now, did the guys who were already with the division a long time, did they treat you well, or were you the second-class citizens?
Well, they were corporals and sergeants. Some of them were very nice, human, just like different personalities that you meet today. Some of them were very likable, it's lovable, you might say, because they had good personalities and you respected them. But other guys were, all right, you guys, let's line up here. All right, sit over, always had a grumpy voice. And you kind of chart them that way in your mind, he's not the kind of guy I would like to go with. But some of these guys were, well, we had the same personality showing there all the time. Overseas too, we had a little competition, and some of the guys didn't respect each other. Even the non-commissioned officers, they have personalities that were not completely acceptable, let's say. But yeah, that's human nature, huh?
Okay. About how long did you spend at Camp Breckenridge?
I think we spent probably, as I recall now, 2 months, 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, 2
All
or
right.
3 months.
Now, over the course of the time that you're still in the States and you're training, did you ever get a leave to go home?
Yes, we did. I was home for a week. But anyway, before we went overseas, we were supposed to have, I had lined up, I was not married, but I was engaged, and I wanted to see my girlfriend. So she agreed to go to Chicago to visit an aunt there, and she gave me the address. So I left Breckenridge in the afternoon on Saturday. We were supposed to get out at noon, and we were there free to go on our weekend pass. Well, some general called up to our general, and says, I'd like to go over there. And so in respect for the visiting general, he got the whole division together, and we had a parade, and we had to stay there till 4 o'clock. And then everybody left. In those days, hitchhiking was perfectly acceptable, and people would take on a uniform very easily. However, when you got hundreds of guys at one time on the same road going the same way, it's tough. And I got stuck. I got a ride to Brazil, Indiana, and I couldn't get out of there on 41. And I waited till midnight, and a flatbed truck came along and stopped and said, where are you going? I said, Chicago. He said, get on the back. I thought I was the only one there. It was a flatbed. And here there were 20 or 30 guys that are hanging on for dear life. And we got to Chicago 5 o'clock in the morning. And that night I had to leave and be home for breakfast at Camp Breckenridge at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I left that train at 5 o'clock p.m. in Chicago, and there were no place to sit. They were standing on the trains. That's the way it was. And they would respect any soldiers or sailors, but there were no seats. So there was these iron racks where they put the suitcases, and they sat there for the first 30 or 40 miles. There was nobody there. I thought, by come, I can sleep up there. So I said to the conductor, would you make sure I get out at whatever the city is in Indiana? I got to go for Breckenridge. I said, be sure I get out by 5 o'clock whenever it hits there. Oh, I'll wake you up, he says. All right. So I went to sleep up there for 4 or 5 hours. And he woke me up just before we got to the stop there. But anyway, those are memorable things. No?
Yeah, I'll bet. Okay.
But the trains were very, very, very crowded, always.
Sure. Okay. So now you get back there, and then you leave Camp Breckenridge. Where do they send you to ship out overseas?
Well, we went over to, I forget what the camp, Kilmar, was it?
Camp
New Jersey.
Kilmer, New Jersey.
Camp
Yes.
Kilmar, New Jersey, yeah.
Okay.
From there we went over on the E.B. Alexander, 7,000 troops, 5 decks on the decks below.
Now, was that ship built as a troop transport, or was it a converted liner?
It was a converted ship.
Okay.
Yes, it was. It was deserted. It was converted for the sole purpose of taking troops over. We were one of 22 ships. We went over the convoy. We zigzagged across. It took us 10 or 11 days, and of course you get a storm on the way, and everybody wants to drop their meal over the sideboards, It was a little rough there after the third or fourth day. But then we had a couple of depth charges were thrown at us, according to the rumors anyway. But
Or
we didn't-
torpedoes, maybe. The depth charges
Torpedoes.
you throw at the submarines, but they shoot torpedoes at you.
Well, whatever they
But there
were.
were some U-boats out there.
They weren't torpedoes because they would have hit us otherwise. But there was a destroyer escort
Right.
following us around. So we would watch that destroyer escort and wonder, oh, now where is he going?
Yeah.
Because he was fast. That boat was pretty fast compared with our boats. But it was a nice
Okay.
trip. Fair
So
trip.
you had a little bit of a U-boat scare then.
Yes, there were.
Yeah. Okay. And then where did you land first in Europe?
We land in, let's see, Swansea,
Swansea, in Wales. Okay.
in Wales, right.
All right.
And we stayed in Wales for additional training because we didn't know what was going on. And we thought we were going to be occupation troops because it was scheduled. Nobody wanted to say it openly. We heard that the rumor was that it was scheduled that the war would be over and we would be in there as occupational troops.
Now, when did you arrive in Britain? Was that November or?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
October.
All right. Okay. Actually, your list here says November 2nd, so you're pretty
Okay,
close. Okay.
that's it.
Okay, so okay, November. All right, and then, so you're there and you train. About how long do you think you stayed there to train?
Well, we kept staying. See, this was in Wales.
Yes.
And the British had certain rules. We had our Quonset huts, and it was very nice, but it was very windy there. And we had to go and we usually went for marches every day, but we couldn't use our weapons at all. We didn't want to scare the British, or they were very kind to this British, of course. And then we would go to town and go to the Red Cross on Saturday, Sunday, come home on Monday, have regular. Monday through Saturday morning was regular instructions and stuff. But we'd take a march for 5 or 10 miles quite often, and then we'd sing on the way and meet the people from Britain, It was a good experience. But they were all waiting. Then one day we got all new weapons, and then we had a demilitarize, what do they do? Take that stuff off the guns,
The Cosmoline.
decosmoline. And then we thought, uh-oh, this looks like we're gonna go. And we got on the British ship. It took her 3 days to get across the harbor to get over to France. We headed at Le Havre.
All right.
And we couldn't get in there because they had sunk some ships in the harbor. So we got on an LCI and got over that way into France. And we got there and it rained, and it rained, and it rained for 3 days. And we had to set up all of our troops, the whole division, and maybe 300 acres there. And it was just muddy camp all the way. But that's where we learned a little bit about the French habits, let's say. We saw a man and his wife and about a 10-year-old boy walking down the street with a bag on their shoulder. And all of a sudden they stopped. And the man goes over 10 feet over and opens his zipper and does this thing, and his wife and son waited for him. And we thought, what in the world, right in front of 500 guys, But then we had the common corners on Paris too. We went to Paris one of these days. We did afterwards. Anyway, they had the corner urinaries, let's say. They're gone now, but at that time they had one at every important corner. They call them Pissary, pisseries.
Yeah. Or pissoir in French, but yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so you have to learn a little bit about the customs of these places, but you're kind of camped out there in the mud for a few days and just doing nothing. Then when they move you, how do they move you?
About 40 and 8 boxcars.
Okay.
We got on the boxcars there, and kind of interesting. We had the trains would only go 20, 25 miles an hour, so, but we knew we were going to go to, they told us we were going to go to Belgium, see. So we started in a train way down in France and went up to Belgium, and it was quite a ride, really. But every time we'd stop, the Frenchmen would be very, very friendly and very thankful, and we'd give them a little stuff, give them our candy, and they always wanted the cigarettes, the guys did, because they couldn't get cigarettes.
Okay. Now, you're doing this, this is now kind of the middle part of December, and the Battle of the Bulge has already started by the time you're moving. So, were you aware that that was happening?
Well, no, we could hear the guns for the last 3-4 days. See, the guns were right. Well, you could
You
hear
hear the artillery, sure.
In fact, when we got off the train, I'll never forget. We were next to 155s. That's a big gun. If they were going to shooting over it, we had to wait there an hour or two for our trucks to come. This is at night now, as I recall. But that great big 155 was like a mammoth lightning going out right next to you. And we had no earmuffs or anything, see, at that time. But that gun was, I would say, it was at a small little town. I can't think of the name of the town. But anyway, the guns were very, very prominent that night. And we knew we were going to be in combat. And then we went to a little town called Manhay. And Manhay was the farthest point that the Germans got. And we replaced the 106th Division. And the 106th was very, very badly beat. As you know, they took the brunt of the blow. Many of them were taken prisoners, and that's where the Germans got the farthest with their SS troops. And when the Manhay came, the captain got us together that first night. He said, "Men, this is our plan. We hold this position at all costs. There is no plan B. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." And that was it. So we had to stay there. And we got shelled pretty bad the first night. In fact, I had a raincoat or overcoat, and it was snowing. It was probably 10 inches of snow. And we came, that was quite an introduction for us. But we had to dig foxholes, and we couldn't, the place where we were at was on a hill, and the Germans were about, I would say, 1,000 feet away from us, 1,500 feet, and we were given instructions, not to make any noise or anything, but there was some wooded area before us, so our mutters were going to go over the woods. But anyway, we got shelled. All of a sudden, they must have seen us, but they shelled us for about an hour, and we couldn't move. We had no chance to dig our foxholes more than maybe 6 inches, but we were scared silly because the next morning I got up and I didn't think much about it, but I had thrown my overcoat on a tree, and we used it that night to cover us in our seats too. But in the morning I got up and I put that overcoat on. There was a big slice of damage to my coat by some shrapnel. But at that time they had what they called tree bursts, and tree bursts are what the shell will hit the tree and start to expand rather than hit the ground and expand. And of course, they were much more effective if they'd have that tree hit the tree, and then the shrapnel would go down.
Right.
But anyway, that was a bad first night.
Now, at that point, was your weapons company all together, or had you already been split up to join the line units?
No, we were there and told we were given this one. As I understand it, the 106 were taking a 25-mile front, and that was way too sparse.
Yeah.
And we took maybe a 2 or 3 mile front, see, the 75th Division.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how much of the 106th Division even went back in that direction.
Oh, they were very sparse as far as the front was concerned. So the Germans got through and captured a bunch of them. I know that.
Yeah, but that was well back ahead of where you were. But anyway, but whatever, you were basically, you were leaving other troops who were in the line or something, reinforcing them?
It was dark when we went there, see, and I say dark, almost dark, because we started digging our foxhole, as I recall, and it was light yet. And we thought we were protected by these trees but they must have heard and seen or had a patrol go out or something, because they knew we were there.
Yeah.
And they shelled us for an hour. They really did.
Okay. And then, did you take a lot of casualties that night?
I don't recall. Not from our platoon. I say a platoon, our section. We were okay. But, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe 1 or 2. I don't remember that.
Now, did the Germans actually try to attack you on the ground at that point, or did you attack them, or what happened?
We held where we had the night before, where
Right.
the 106th was.
Mm-hmm.
But we just held, there's a little thing, if you ever go to Mannheim, Belgium, and I saw it 25 years later, it says this is the farthest point that the Germans got in their drive to Liège
Right.
and Antwerp. And so that's where we were, at Mannheim.
Okay. And then what did you do then after that?
Well, we after that we held there and stayed there for I think a couple of days, and then we got more troops and more helpers, and then we moved in, or I say in, farther to the east.
Right.
And we went east and had Crêpe Spa. We went to a little town called Crêpe Spa, which was a little resort town in Belgium. And then we went there, and it was quite an experience. We the fella who we stayed in his house, and he was so kind to us. We had 7 in a bedroom, but we were tickled pink to be in the house. And he told us the story about he was in the Belgium underground, and of course the Belgium didn't have any army, but the underground was despised by the Germans. And they occupied that for I don't know how long, months and months and years, a couple of years.
Yeah, since 1940, so yeah.
Yeah, since 1940. So they were tickled pink to see us. But they took his daughter, 17-year-old girl, just as they were leaving the night before, and threw her in the back of the truck. And we visited him, his place, Crêpe Spa, 25 years later, and found out that she had been okay. They didn't rape her. But then she moved to, what's the other town? Starts with a B.
Brussels, big town?
Where?
Brussels, the capital? The capital of Belgium is Brussels. That's the big town.
Well, it wasn't Brussels.
Okay.
Where was the 82nd?
Oh, well, the 101st Airborne was at Bastogne.
Bastogne.
Yeah.
That's where she had
Okay.
living in Bastogne. But then he told us that the Germans got mad. What they did is the underground shot one of their officers and killed him in that little town. So they set up all the boys, little kids, and put the machine guns on their feet just to scare them, see. Well, it was not very kind, but they weren't very kind to the Germans anyway, and vice versa.
All right. Now, as you're moving forward, are you engaging the Germans, or are they withdrawing, or what's happening?
Well, yeah, the war was different than it was in the First World War. There was no line, you know. You captured towns, and then you protected that town, and you didn't move on to the next town. So sometimes there was a whole perimeter of support, you might say, to protect that town. And if we were going to attack the town, we'd have to get. Usually at the crossroads, there was they had a machine gun, and then they would kind of mow you down if you got into that crossroads. You did just so far, but it was we would go and we'd say, well, we're going to attack this town, and that was our objective. See, and sometimes now. Later on, in the Ruhr Valley, we had larger towns, see. There were little suburbs of Dortmund and Essen and along there, and that was a little different kind of a war, too. And we had snipers. We had a lot of snipers there. There were even kids. See, the kids would throw rocks at us when our troops would go through our convoys, you know. During this time, the Germans had captured some Americans and taken their uniforms, and they had guys that spoke perfect English, and they got in charge of MPs. They got rid of the MPs, and they misdirected traffic, and we had a lot of problems. You don't read about that, but
Well, you do actually in the history books. That's there.
you did.
Yeah.
It was not good, and we had to give them passwords. See, we had passwords that night. Who won the World Series last week? You know, that sort of thing. And who's the president of America right now? And small things that only Americans would know. But anyway, that's what when we saw guys that we didn't know, we didn't trust them. It's a funny feeling, really, because this is in Belgium now.
Yeah. All right.
But, they were they ran loose behind us for a long time, and we had to check at night too. You wouldn't move at night unless you had to, and sometimes we had to, but very seldom. And sometimes we'd send patrols out too, and then patrols would go out and come back with a live prisoner or something as their objective.
Okay. Now, at this time, was your normal job to be on a machine gun or on a mortar,
Well,
or did it change?
we had radios at that time, 25-pound radios, and I was only a PFC, so I had to put that. I was really a gunner, but I had to put that radio in, and I would go up with a forward observer, with the attack line groups, and then we'd get a target and we'd give the instructions, to where we wanted those 3 shells to go.
Okay.
Usually you shot 3 shells, one to the left and one to the right and one in the middle, see?
Okay. So you're going up there with the line units up in the front line, and you're communicating with the mortar platoon basically, and telling them what to do. Okay. And I don't know, how dangerous did that get? How dangerous did it get for you to be doing that?
Oh, we were right with the line troops if they saw us. Toward the end of the war, at Ruhr Valley, we were going to attack. We were going to try to capture a town called Castrop Bruxel, which was a suburb of Dortmund. And I think the 289th got stuck there for 3 days. They couldn't. They lost quite a few troops trying to get that area. But anyway, we went in there, and I was assigned to L Company because they were the attack company. Usually there's the attack company, then there's 2 other companies on the side of you, Anyway, we started to go into that town, and we got up, I think, at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. And then we marched into that town. We didn't know where the troops were, SSers again. And then we went just about so far, and there was a valley down there with the railroad tracks going through it. And the Germans waited for us, for L Company, all to pull ahead. And then they opened fire on us. And there we were, and there were trees in there. But I got stuck with that radio on my back, and I thought I better wait. So I waited about 10 minutes. And then some guys got hit from L Company and were looking for medics, but the firepower was pretty good. So I waited about 10 minutes. I learned something that a first guy told me in training. He said, the first lesson you want to learn is don't panic. And I thought to myself, my reaction was to get behind a bigger tree. And I couldn't do that because I had that radio on, so at my back. But anyway, I waited and about 10 minutes, and then I ran behind that. I ran sideways because that big tree was right where I wanted to be, and I think the last bullet was about 3 feet from me. It kicked up the sand, and I could see it, and I hit the dirt, and I stayed there until I could. Usually, see, the attack was pretty rough. What they had is they had some machine guns on that railroad track, and they were camouflaged, and we couldn't find those machine guns. But we didn't sort of put the things to them until we could find the targets. But then it's kind of interesting. Major Bishop was our bishop. I always remember this. But I went back, and he set up a CP command post right there in a house right behind us. And I was there with the sergeant that was with me, and we waited and watched him. And there was a tank commander that came in and says, he said, I want you to go in there. And he said, you got 5 tanks. And he said, go down the main street. And this captain for the tanker says, Major, I refuse to do that. And they argued and argued for 3 hours. And finally, at 1 o'clock, the captain went in with his tanks, and 10 minutes later, they drove those 2 tanks out, and the captain was dead. So the captain was right, and the major was wrong. But see what they went into town, and they threw in hand grenades from the 2nd-story windows. It was an open target. They came in with 5 tanks, and this was what the captain said. But And he went in there almost at the insistence of the major,
Right.
and he came out. Boy, those tanks turned a corner there. I'll never forget that. And I thought sure that you didn't think that it was happening, but that tank kind of tipped a little bit. It was going that fast. They were glad to get out of there, but he was dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was sad. And then the next day, we were with L Company, and I was assigned to them, so I stayed with them at night. And we were in this town, and we thought the Germans were on top of a hill, like sort of a rise there in that town, a small town, Casterbrook. And 4 people went by there, and 2 civilians and 2 L Company guys, and the Germans had it zeroed in, and he got all 4 of them. They killed all 4 of them the next day.
All right. Now, were you able eventually to call in artillery fire or something to try to?
Come again?
Were you able to call in artillery fire or something to hit the German positions? Did you ever find them, or what happened eventually?
Well, we went through there. There were snipers in that building too. See, we had to go through there and by house, and I opened the door, and I was alone. But there was a guy with me about 10, 20 feet away. But I opened the door, and here were 30 people in the basement, old people shaking.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that we were going to come because there was a lot of firepower going on there. But we were looking for kids. See, someone said there was a 14-year-old kid with a rifle, and we were going to look for him in this block. And
Okay. So basically, what would happen would be the Germans would resist for a while, and then they'd pull out, or
yeah, they got our troops pulled out then. See, apparently, and then we took over,
mm-hmm.
and we finally got the town that night. But then we called in some tanks too from another direction. See,
Mm-hmm.
one of our guys from M Company, I can't think of his name now, but he got a Silver Star because he directed our tanks against the German Tiger tanks. We had 2 Tiger tanks that came into that town
Okay.
from a different road. See, and he was kind of undercover, and I think he got a Silver Star for that, if I'm not mistaken. He was a machine gunner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because their tanks were better than our tanks.
Oh,
so.
that Tiger was a very scary tank.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was. They put 88s on those,
Mm-hmm.
and that was one of the best guns of the war, really.
Yeah.
I hate to say it,
Yeah,
but
and they
it
had
was
more
good.
armor and bigger guns.
Oh, those things could go 5 miles high in the air, anti-aircraft guns, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they could also go straight at you.
Okay. Now, now were you pretty much in the field and in action consistently from
No,
December into
no.
March, or?
You're part of it, whether you. We weren't always with the attack company. See,
Right.
we were assigned by platoons.
Mm-hmm.
See, we go as a heavy mortars to go with the attack company.
Right.
But towards the end of the war was where we had some. See, Dortmund was a bad area to go. I mean, there was a big aluminum factory there, and the aluminum factory had a couple thousand workers, and we captured that, and there was a fence around it, you know, and we couldn't get in there, so they wouldn't open it for us, so we blew it up, blew the gate up,
Mm-hmm.
get in there. Same way with a little town in Orsoy. It was sad because that old town was, I think, 300 years old, and we couldn't get in there with our tanks. That was on Germany, on the Rhine
Mm-hmm.
River, towards the end of the war. And then the engineers came up and blew up the whole beautiful. There was a picture of it that we saw after we blew it up.
Like a town gate kind of thing?
Pardon?
Well, like a town gate or something like that? Yeah.
The gate going into town. It was an old-fashioned gate going into the town, see, on the Rhine River. Orsoy, O-R-S-O-Y.
Okay. All right. Now, as you're moving through Germany in this period, are you seeing much? I mean, you found one group of civilians hiding in a cellar. I mean, did you see many others at that point, or did they stay out of your way?
Civilians?
Yeah.
You talking about German civilians? Well, normally they'd go out of town. See, in fact, there was a small village. We'd kick them out of town in a nice way. Say, you know, but then we'd take over. Sometimes, in fact, at Westphalia, at the end of the war, we told the German to get out with it, and he didn't like that because that was his house. Well, we said, well, we have to have a place for our troops. And he swore at us, I'm sure, in German. But then the next morning we opened the door, and here was the cows staring at us. We thought it was just an ordinary house, but it was a farmhouse, see?
Mhm.
And they had the barn right next to into the house, see? 2 cows there. Oh, boy.
Did you have anybody in your unit who spoke any German?
No, not that I know. But just small words, you know.
Yeah.
You learn some things after. Toward the end of the war, well, after the war, we had some PWs, German PWs, prisoners of war, and then they were serving us in our camps. We had Camp Brooklyn, Camp New York, and Camp Boston as a demarcation.
Mhm.
We would debark from there, going back to America, see. But then we were at those camps, and we processed 10,000 troops a week, see, and then move on to new gang, and they'd get back. But they were not ships big enough or many enough to bring us back. There were no planes at the time, so it took me 9 months to get back.
Okay. Now this tape is about up, so we're going to pause right. All right. Now in your story, we've gotten down toward the end of the war, and your unit is active, and they're fighting in Germany. Where was your unit at the time the Germans surrendered? Were you still in the Ruhr, or had you moved?
No, we were in the Westphalia area, which is part of the western part of Germany, sort of like a county.
Right.
And I can't think of the name of the towns, but toward the end of the war, we waited, you know, because Roosevelt made a deal with Stalin that we could go to the Elbe River, and we couldn't go any further. Well, we were there, and the Russians were another 100 miles way back. So we had to wait a month or so for them because they could get to the Elbe River. So we waited. It was in Germany, and then we had interesting observation is that we had a lot of displaced persons, DPs. And these people, by the hundreds and thousands, were going back, and they clogged the roads. And it was to the point where they couldn't get our convoys through because the people were going back home hundreds of miles away sometimes and sleeping on the side of the road just like, you know, dogs. It's terrible. But anyway, we fed a lot of those, and a lot of those displaced persons. Well, after a while, at the end of the war, we had to stop them. And so I was on a detail where we were at a crossroads, a large crossroads. And we had 2 Dutch guys that came on bicycles. And they wanted to go, so I said, where are you going? He said, Amsterdam. I said, oh, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm a medical student. And he had I think he had 2 years in already. But we let them through, 2 of us. And then he got caught at the next stop. So he spoke perfect English and German and Dutch. And so the captain who was in charge, who was sort of the mayor of the town after the war, said, I need an interpreter. So would you stay with me? He couldn't move anyway because of our rules. But we saw people by the hundreds on the side of the road at night just strapping down her. They had something on their backs, maybe a blanket or something, but they'd sit there at the side of the road. And kids are kids. Towards the end of the war, we were at a farm area, and there was a Polish fella with 2 younger Polish people. This guy was maybe 70 years old. He was a displaced persons also, and they were leaving to go back to Poland. So one of our guys put a sign in there, Poland or bust, on the back of the wagon. And this was on a farm. So we loaded it up with goodies that he got from the farmer's basement. And this guy, it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and this old guy was drunk. He was so happy, you know, finally he was going to go back to Poland. And it was a big wagon. We had a team of horses on front. We were never going to go home with a team of horses. See, it was really sad because once they got to the main road, they were just blocked. They didn't know that. They didn't think of it. So anyway, that poor guy fell right on his head. We threw him in the wagon. See, he was dead drunk. But we threw him back, we didn't, but his friends threw him back in a wagon and took off with that 2 horses in the wagon. I don't know if they made it or not, but.
So you had people going in all directions, depending on where home was.
Right, exactly. Mostly Polish. But then we were we captured this aluminum factory in, I think it was right in Dortmund. But it was a large factory with thousands of employees. And we saw these Polish people, they hardly had shoes on. And there were 3 of them, and the next morning we saw them digging a hole, and we watched them, and they had one of their guys die, and they were going to put him in the hole, in the burial ground.
Hello.
We're recording. So
Come on in, Jim, this is Bee, my wife.
if you want to go that way, that's fine. Okay, all right.
But anyway, they had to dig this hole, this grave, for their buddy, and right in the plain view of us when going by there.
Yeah. Now, did you see many German prisoners?
Well, they worked for us in the camps
Yeah.
after the war, see. We held them, and then they would prepare the food.
Right.
We didn't
But
have,
before that, when you were out in the field, when you were still in Germany and you were still marching through Germany, did you see very many Germans who had surrendered, or were they someplace else?
oh, yeah. We had a very interesting experience. We were in a convoy, and we would move toward the end of the war, sometimes 5 or 10 miles a day, see, just sort of in a group, as a regiment. Well, anyway, our captain was with us, and we were just on the outskirts of a very wealthy community, I would say, old community, and we came on a great big house on the side of the road, maybe 30 feet off the road, and 3-story house. And the captain said, "Stop, halt the convoy." And we said, "What's the matter? What's going on? You know, surround the house and don't anybody fire a shot." He said, "We're going to take this without a shot." So we said, "What's going on?" And he says, "I saw a rifle." One of the guys saw a rifle out of the window. So we surrounded the house, and we waited and waited about 15 minutes, and finally a white flag comes out. 16 people, 16 guys from the Wehrmacht, which was the German army. The youngest was 16 and the old was 60 years old, I would say. 16 guys.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because the captain said to you, "Zylstra and Rock, you get in there and clean the house. Make sure that they're all gone." And we had four windows with 4 machine guns in it and 16 rifles. So we took them prisoner, these 16 guys, and I was going to keep a souvenir, a nice German 9mm Mauser. So I threw it in. Each of our companies or each of our squads had a jeep and a trailer for the guns and their equipment. And so I threw those things in there. I had 4 of them because we got in the house and we cleared it all out. Norman, Rock, and myself. And by light time, 3 of my buddies stole 3 of my rifles, and I still have one to this day. But anyway, we got down and I better stop there. It was quite an experience. But we said, I said to the captain, "Make sure that we're not going to get booby trapped. And keep the guys here and tell them that they pay the price if Rock and I get booby trapped." Oh, 999, the German says. We talked to him about booby trap. Because at that time, a lot of the stuff was going on after the war, booby trapping a house, see, to get us. But anyway, it was not booby trap. I found a beautiful Prussian general's uniform in the attic, sitting on a sort of we watched him, and we went all through the house. The Germans were having breakfast down in the basement, see, but there was nobody there. No, nobody that lived there was in the house. But we took those 16 prisoners.
Right.
But that was toward the end of the war.
Right.
And then at that time, I think they were glad to get caught because they weren't very, let's say, positively thinking anymore.
Yeah. Well, when they have that combination of personnel and they're using old men and boys, that's getting down to the end.
Yeah, it is.
Now, you mentioned off camera an incident involving a friend of yours in your unit who was the medic, Doc Stayhauer. You talked a little, you told me a little bit about him and what happened with him toward the end of the war. Can you tell that story here?
Well, yeah, we were sitting writing letters. It was toward the end of the war, and we were still in Germany. But it was about 9 o'clock at night, and someone came in the room where we were at the table, and they said, "Is there a medic here?" And Doc says, "Yeah, why?" He said, "We need a guy. He got hurt, and we don't dare to move him too much, but we got to get him back." So Doc went with a Jeep driver, and they had a thing rigged up on the car with a stretcher, and he brought him back, and the Jeep driver got a Bronze Star, and Doc would not get one because the other guy, the lieutenant said he already had one, so he's not going to get another one. But sometimes guys got 2 and 3 Bronze Stars, you know.
Sure they did.
So, but he had another experience in Colmar. I wasn't there, but we got kind of Colmar in France was southern France, and when he got his Bronze Star was we had some German prisoners, and the prisoners. I think we had some guys injured there pretty badly, and we couldn't get them out because they had us covered. They had us zeroed in. So he told the prisoners they were going to get these guys. "Oh no," they said, "we're not going to go in there." So he put red crosses on their arms, and they went in there and got our guys out by nightfall. And he got the Bronze Star.
Okay. Now, I mean, going back through your kind of chronology that you did and following your story a little bit more precisely, do you remember how you spent Christmas 1944?
We were in Belgium, and there was an organ there, a little pump organ in a house. And one of our guys played the organ. He played the piano, actually. He was a jazz pianist. And he played, and we sang Christmas carols with that family. But Christmas Day was a more memorable time because for the first time, the day before Christmas, we had the first time we could get airplanes over there in about 10 days' time. The weather was so bad, we couldn't get any flights over there.
Right.
The day before Christmas, there were 7,000 sorties, and we watched 22 planes go down, I'll never forget. And only 3 parachutes out of any one plane. That was the most of any parachutes. So you can imagine what it cost us that day for the Air Force. But they kept coming. They started at, I would say, 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and they came all day, going back and forth, see?
Yeah.
But the German Air Force was sort of knocked out by that time.
Yeah.
So there was not much of an Air Force toward the end of the war. But we went over there the day before Christmas, and it's like a movie. And then it's unreal, it's hard to believe, but a little German Messerschmitt kind of fired at one of our parachutes. And a small P-38, one of our planes, was circling around there and saw that. And he followed that parachute till it got about 200 feet from the ground. And he tipped his wings at it and took off and followed and tried to get the Messerschmitt, but I'm sure he didn't. But anyway, it was just like a movie, watching the whole thing right there.
Now, did you have some kind of church service for Christmas?
No. We had, I think we didn't.
Well, you have a note here about a chaplain talking to you.
We did too, I'll take it back. No, that was a different time. We had a chaplain that got us together in a barn. And he said, before we were going into the attack, the next day, he made a statement that I'll never forget. He said, "Men, we will not all be here by tomorrow night." And it's enough to shake you up. And he was right, because we lost some men the next day. But that barn was full. Usually you have 50 guys for chapel, and here was 300 or 400 guys in that barn, on the outside. And
All right.
But that was a call to duty.
Now, I think, now did you have to leave the unit for a while? Did you get sick or hurt?
Yes. We were on our way to a small town called Tres Ponts, 3 bridges.
Trapon, yeah.
In Belgium.
Yeah.
and it was dark, and it's snowing, and cold, and we were in a convoy, and the convoy we got started, and we drove with little drive-out, blackout lights, we call them. And all they were was just sort of a blighted candle. You could hardly see, but you weren't allowed to, we were not supposed to see them at night. But anyway, we were in a line of cars or jeeps, and we had trailers, and we wanted to ride because otherwise we had to walk. The other guys walked. But there were 4 in the jeep and 4 hanging onto that trailer, 4 guys. And I was one of the guys on the trailer. And we hit a shell hole about 3 foot wide and about 10 inches deep. And I flew off, and a 200-pound guy landed on top of me, Crandall White. And I thought I was injured, but right on my back. So they took me to that town, the nearest town, and we stayed with the 88th, some guys from the 88th Division, until I could get a ride to the hospital. And then the next day I went to the hospital. But he said to me, I'm not sure I want to take my boots off tonight or not. It was in the basement of a house. And I said, why not? And he said, last night we got kicked out. The Germans pushed us back. So he said, I think I'll take my boots off tonight. Holy smokes, I was scared. But we made it. The next morning I woke up about 5 o'clock and it was getting, we were okay.
All right. And then did you have to stay, did you go someplace to get treated, or what happened to you?
Yes. I went to Paris, to a hospital in Paris. And when I got there, they set me next to a guy who just was released from a prison camp. He was an Air Force guy, a sergeant, a young guy from Texas. He had tuberculosis, and they put me in the same room with him. And I still have a positive tuberculosis reaction today.
Wow.
The guy, the next room, died the next morning. These were prisoners of war that the Germans had. We had just found their camp and released them, see. And they were just flooding the hospitals. That was a wonderful thing when they got released, of course.
All right. Now, did you stay? Did you move on to get treated somewhere else?
Yeah, I went way down to Étampes, France, and there was a rehabilitation unit there, and I got some rehab things, and I got sent back. And from there on, we went to Germany.
Right.
I mean, to Holland.
Right.
And my group was in Holland, on the Maas River, a little town called Neer, N-E-E-R. And we were there, and I still don't understand why the British, they could not push the Germans out of Holland. It was toward the end of the war. But anyway, it's something I'll never understand.
Well, the British they were low on manpower, and parts of Holland were very heavily fortified. So the British were low on manpower.
Yeah.
And the Germans were well fortified in some places.
Oh,
so
they were there because we would see them across the river.
Yeah.
And one night we saw a guy go in and out of the house for 2 days. We watched him going in that big house, and so we put 3 rounds in there. See, and the guy never came out. So we think we might have gotten him. We hit the building direct. See. But,
now, were you on the Rhine River or another river?
Maas River.
Maas. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was just a difficult place.
Later on, we were on the Rhine,
right,
in a little town. Well, that was later on. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, you spend kind of a lot of February in the Netherlands then.
Well, it was only 10 days for the British.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go in, and then go into Germany from there.
Went back into Germany.
All right.
Yeah, from there we went to Battle of the Ruhr, but that was worse than we thought it was. We thought it was going to be easy toward the end of the war. But one thing we saw when we got to Dortmund that day, that morning we went to this little area, and Dortmund's a big city, of course, 500,000 people or more. But anyway, we saw a great big 88 being pulled by a horse, and our troops shot the horse, and the horse was dead in the street. We came back at night because we were going to have our billets there, and that horse was there, just flesh and bones. The flesh was gone, and the Germans were there with big knives cutting that meat off that horse. But, see, that was toward the end of the war.
All right. You've also got a note here, and about the time of the Rhine crossing in early March, you have a note here that says that you saw Churchill and Monty on the way to Germany.
Yeah, Churchill. This was in Holland.
Yeah.
And it was afternoon, and we were with the British, and we all of a sudden about 2:30 or 3, we heard a clanging of metal, and we heard some sirens coming up and some motors coming up, motorcycles, and we thought, what in the world is this? So we stopped, and here's Winston Churchill with his two fingers like this. See, this is a sign of victory that we always had during when you see the British.
Right.
And the kids, Belgium, they would go like this. That means victory, see. So, well, we saw him with a black suit on, a cigar.
All right.
Open car.
Okay. So now, are there other particular events and things that happened before the end of the war that kind of stand out in your memory?
I remember the day that the war was ended. We were sort of taking over this town because we were sort of the mayor, and we were waiting for the end of the war. We knew it was coming, but then someone came to us and told us that this was the end of the war, and we were kind of watching at a roadside crossing there, and we said to these Germans that were coming by, the Gewehr is kaputt. And they were happy, because they were, well, not as happy as we were, but we were happy that war was finally over. But we were there sort of toward the end of the war, just sort of occupational troops, see. And then a fella came up to us, and I still think that he was a young guy, probably 25 years old, and he had civilian clothes on. He asked us if he could have some salt from us, S-A-L-T. And one of the guys from the kitchen was going to give him, this is a German citizen, see? And one of the guys was going to go to the cook and get some salt for him. And one of our guys, the sergeant, he said, hey, wait a minute. We brought that salt 3,000 miles. You're not going to get salt. You get your own salt, And that was the end of the conversation. He moved on. But see, what they were doing toward the end is if they were German uniform, we would have made them prisoners. So he had civilian clothes on, and I think he was a little bit too cocky. But anyway.
All right. Now, once the Germans surrendered, did your unit stay in that place for a while, or did you go somewhere else?
No, we stayed there for a while. But then I got, hard to believe, I got, what do they call it? It was starts with an H.
Hernia? Hernia?
No, not a hernia. It's a disease.
Okay, hepatitis?
Hepatitis.
Okay.
I had hepatitis there, and I had a fever of 102, and finally they took me to the hospital. I went to Paris by plane, and it was bad. I got the fever finally left me, but I was gone for probably 3 weeks, and I came back. Okay.
So was your unit still in the same place?
Well, they have camps. They have what do they call them, camps? Retro starts with an R. Anyway, I had to go to a couple camps before I got back, but I was tickled pink to get back, of course, because then the war was ended. Yeah.
Now, did you stay on for some part of the occupation?
Well, yes, I had to stay on for 9 more months because I didn't have enough points.
Okay.
So you got 5 points for each child and 5 points for a wife, and I think it was 2 points for every month overseas. And you had to have 85 points before you could go home.
Right.
And then some guys, we waited in Camp New York, and I waited with a guy who became the attorney for John F. Kennedy, and we stayed together in a little thing called Information and Educational Office, and we were See, after the war, we had thousands of guys that were just twiddling their thumbs, wondering what to do. So the Army was very, very thinking, and they set up a university called Biarritz University in Biarritz, France. And they had hundreds of guys going there, but they had to make application. So we were at that camp in charge of that. So kind of interesting, because we brought our applications. We had all forms to, and some of them were for air conditioning school in England, and we had the French Beaux-Arts in Paris, a French university where they would take 30 students or so, and we had applications for all those. Well, then one guy, can't think of it, Silverstein was his name, from L Company. He was mad because he applied twice to go to some school and he didn't make it. So he said to me, where do you guys report to? And I said, we go to Rouen once a week, France, and it's 60 miles away. We had jeeps, this is after the war now, and we bring in our, so I said to the guy in charge over in Rouen, I said, how do you guys pick these? He said, frankly, he said, we just think we pick the best ones, but we don't know. He said, if you've got a guy you think is good, let us know. Come in and just tell us, and we'll make sure he goes to that school. So we did that after a while, see. Little politics.
All right. Now, how long did you stay in Germany after the end of the war?
Well, after the war, I went to Camp New York, see.
And
we stayed there for 8 months,
Okay.
10 months.
Now, was Camp New York in Germany, or was that back in France?
In France.
Yeah.
Most of those were, they had the cigarette
The
camps.
cigarette camps, I'm familiar with those.
Yeah.
And those are the debarkation
Philip
camps.
Morris, debarkation, yeah.
Yeah.
But then they had these,
Or embarkation or something. Yeah.
we'd process Air Force primarily in our camp.
Okay.
But we had, it's kind of interesting. A guy, one of our guys came up to me one night. He said, hey, Zylstra, you want to make a little money? I said, what's this? And he said, we got some extra equipment. He says, that's not, when people come in, it's more than they see a damaged truck or a damaged unit, they'll bring it back, and it's not on their schedule, see? They're only allowed to have 6 trucks or whatever. So this is an extra truck where he wanted to sell it. So he was going to sell it to some froggies 50 miles away. He was going to meet him at midnight at this corner 50 miles away, and he said, I'll drive one, you drive one, and we'll take that one back. I said, no way, count me out. I'm not going to be part of that. But that was, and a friend of mine was in Paris, and he used to line up the jeeps, and he said there was one stolen every night, almost. He said you couldn't keep track of them, because the froggies they wanted those things, you know, and then we finally sold them after the war in an orderly way, you know. There's a lot of black market going on too. We'd go to Paris, for example, and you'd have a carton of cigarettes, and we were given a pack of cigarettes a day, see, for a nickel, I think, a nickel apiece. Well, there was a black market going on in Paris, and if you had a carton of cigarettes, why, the little froggy would stop you. You have cigarettes to sell? And some of the guys say, well, how much? Combien, that means how much? 1,500, no, I give you 700 francs, or I give you 400 francs, whatever it was. And we say, okay, thank you, and move on. That was just 1 minute, but and they would sell them too, see.
Right.
There was a big black market going on in
Sure.
cigarettes.
Sure. And in all sorts of things. Now, did any of the men in your unit that you know of get in trouble with women or other discipline problems? Because there were plenty of women in Paris, and you could pay for them too.
Come again.
Well, there were also women in Paris. There was prostitution and all of that going on.
Very open, very open. And then, I hate to say it, but after the war, you asked Doc Stahar about this. There was a tent, and a woman came with her daughter and set up a pup tent. And there were guys, we're waiting to come home, see? There were guys lined up for 300 francs to do their thing with a woman. And the line was longer than the sick call line. So some of these guys got in trouble.
Yeah.
because these prostitutes were supposed to be checked every 6 months by the French medical authorities, and that was the only protection they had.
Hmm.
But it was sad. Hard
There are
to
things
see.
to be said for a good Christian upbringing. You stay out of that kind of trouble.
It was really sad. And then this woman would put on a show with her daughter, I guess it was, a French woman. Asked Doc about it.
Hmm. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Now, you mentioned that you were doing this thing where you were assigning people to these different university programs. Did you ever do any of those yourself?
I went to Biarritz,
Hmm.
and I got, I think, 15 credits or there, something like that.
Okay.
But it was wonderful. The guy that we had for Sociology 101 was from Yale, and another guy was from Harvard.
Hmm.
And these guys were sent by the government. They stayed for at least 6 months.
Hmm.
I don't know how long the Biarritz University was in, but it was a very good school.
Yep.
I always have the highest regard for that Biarritz. And I got full credit from University of Michigan
Hmm.
when I graduated.
It's also kind of a nice town, isn't it? There's a resort town just north of the Spanish
Oh,
border.
it was a beautiful town.
Yeah.
And we took some pictures of the kids, and we'd give them candy, you know, and oranges. Usually at the, in France especially, we'd have things where we would put our food after we were finished. Some guys didn't like it, so they'd dump it.
Hmm.
Frenchmen were there with cans, holding out their cans. Please pour it in here, see. And we'd give them our oranges. We'd get oranges from Spain or somewhere, and then we'd have a fresh orange for breakfast sometimes. And then the GIs would feel sorry for them and give them the orange, see.
Hmm.
They were nice.
Okay. Now, how long did you stay in Biarritz? How long was that course?
Biarritz?
Yeah.
I don't recall. I think it was 6 months,
Okay.
maybe longer. But they had a full band and they had everything there. I was in the band. I play a trombone, see, and then they had, we had a lot of outgoing activities. I have a little newspaper yet that I saved from Biarritz. You ought to read that sometime.
Okay. So you had a pretty interesting time after the end of the war.
Oh yes,
All things
yes.
considered.
There was lots to do and lots to see, and of course, we always wanted to pass for over the weekend, see if we could. It was easy to get, but once I say easy, usually it was. Sometimes they couldn't. But I was only a PFC,
Mhm.
so I didn't have much oomph, you know.
Right.
But the Army was loaded with PFCs in our outfit because we had a lot of Air Corps dropouts that they stopped the program and then they sent them as replacements like they did us. But they had the rankings,
Hmm.
so we had to give them jobs fit for their rank,
Right.
even though they weren't as qualified as we were, see.
Hmm.
But that's the Army.
Okay. Now, where were you when you found out you could go home?
I was in Camp New York,
Okay. So you'd finished at Biarritz and gone back.
right.
Okay.
And then we had to wait. Well, you know, the rumors were that now Doc Stahar, I think, had over 100 points because he was married and had 2 children. So he got 15 more points for that. And he was in a little bit longer than I was, too. So he was one of the first. And there was another guy, shouldn't tell him. He was a sergeant, and he was my neighbor in Grand Rapids, but I gave him some things to take home, some souvenirs, and he never made it to home.
Mm.
And I called him a year later, and, oh yeah, he said, those were stolen from me on the ship
Hmm.
going back. So I thought, well, I haven't seen him since.
All right. But you got your Mauser home?
I got my Mauser home. I shipped it home.
Hmm.
I shipped it home, and I still have it. German 9mm Mauser rifle.
Okay.
Built in 1944, it says on the bottom. So they must have built them like, you know, a dime a dozen.
All right. Okay.
The-
So when did you actually get to go home?
I got home March the the 10th. Well, we were there, I think, 5 days before,
Mm-hmm.
but they had to process us out of Camp Atterbury, Indiana.
Right.
And so then the guy said, let's see now, he said, we got everything? He said, I said, no, you don't have the fact that my feet were frozen. And he said, well, stay tomorrow and we'll have that. And I stay at my foot. I said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going home today. I got $300 cash and I'm going to meet my friends for a party tonight. So I made it home. I hitchhiked home from Camp Atterbury, see.
All right.
In those days, it was easy to get a hitchhiked
Mhm.
ride. I mean, they respected the uniform, and you trusted the riders and the givers of the ride, and it was a different complexion than it was
Sure.
after.
Sure. But there were a lot fewer cars or people who had
Oh.
gas and anything else like that too.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's a little bit
It was
different.
a commonly accepted practice to hitchhike, I would say,
Okay.
especially for GIs.
When you came back from France, what kind of ship were you on, and how did that
This-
ride go?
This was another ship, E.B. Alexander.
I think the Alexander you said was what you took over, but anyway.
That's a different one, yeah.
Yeah.
One going back was 4,000 guys,
Hmm.
and it took us a little less time. I think it was only 5 days.
Right.
So it was much better than time. And there was no storm that I recall.
No
going
storm,
back.
no U-boats, no zigzagging.
I was going to kiss the soil when I got off that boat, but the traffic, the GIs going for so much, we had stuff on our back, so I didn't dare to kiss the soil. But I told the guys I was going to kiss the soil when I got back to USA, but I never did.
All right. Okay. Now, once you finally got back home to Grand Rapids, what did you do then?
I prepared to get married
Hmm.
to the girl that I loved. We'd been going with each other for 3 years, and my dad didn't like the idea of me getting married before I went into the service, because I might get killed and then
Hmm.
I would leave a widow back here. So I thought, okay, well, when do we get back? So I got married in June. I got home in March.
Hmm. And then, did you go back for some more school, or?
I went back to school. I went to the University of Michigan, and they had an extension school in Grand Rapids. So I went there for a while, and then they closed that down after 10 years or so. But then you had to go for 1 year on campus. So I went to Ann Arbor finally, and ended up at Ann Arbor.
Okay. And what did you get your degree in?
I got a BBA, Bachelor of Business Administration.
Mhm. And then, did you go into business after that?
Well, interesting story. I met a fella in the Army who was in L Company. His name was Robert Dice, D-I-C-E, and he lived in Grand Rapids. And we used to go to chapel together because he was a Christian fella also. And Doc Stahauer and Bob Dice and I would go to chapel together. We became friends, and he was captured. He was captured in Colmar,
Mm-hmm.
France. So when he got captured, his mother, he was missing in action. The Army notified his family. And they went gaga, you know, obviously. Where's my boy, my brother, my sister? And so he knew I was in the company next to him. So his mother called my mother, and she asked if my mother would find out from me how his last seen,
Mhm.
or what happened to him. So I went to see the guys that last saw him, and they said, oh, he was taking some prisoners back, and he lost his glasses by shrapnel, I guess, in Colmar, and he couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Why he ever got in the infantry, I'll never know, but he did. But anyway, they gave him his glasses were gone, so the captain said, take these 3 guys back. Well, then they were shelled, and when they shelled, you hit the dirt. So when they got up, why, obviously, they got him, took his rifle, and they let him. Colmar was a city, see, and the Germans were in one area and the Americans were in the other. So they went to their area, and how they got there, I don't know, but that's how they did. But these guys saw Bob, and they saw that the shells come in. They saw him hit the dirt. That's the last they saw. So they thought he was taken prisoner, and that's exactly what happened. Well, I never saw him until in Ann Arbor. He was in his last year in law school, and we met at 10 o'clock one night. He was coming down the street, and I was coming down the street the other way, and we met, and we became friends, and we visited in Ann Arbor quite often, and in Grand Rapids. Well, he took this job from the Hartford Insurance Company as an adjuster. And boy, I thought that was a deal. He got a company car, and he had an expense account, and he could do his own things and make his own decisions on actions that he investigated. I thought, that's a deal. So he told his boss, he said, I got my buddy who wants to, no, they said, we don't hire anybody except attorneys. So I took a job at American Seating for $1.07 an hour as a factory clerk. And about a year later, I got a call from Bob Dice. He said, say, my boss wants to see you. Oh, okay. So I went to see his boss, and he said, well, we'd like to, you know, he gave me an interview. He said, I think you're all right, but you got to go to Chicago. I said, what's that for? And he said, take a test, see how you're doing. So I took it, went to Chicago. He says, it might take you half a day. So I went there, left at 7 in the morning, and I got there. I took a test for about 45 minutes, and the guy gave me another test, and he came back about 20 minutes later. He said, say, give me that paper. He wants to see you right now. So I went down the next floor. This is a 17-story building. The Hartford guy said, when can you start? I said, well, I should give American Seating 2 weeks. And he said, you're right. It's only fair, but we'd like to have you start as soon as you can. So I got to be an adjuster, and I was with Hartford, learned the adjusting ropes, and they had all attorneys there at the time, but they hired, since I got there, they hired other guys too. So that's how I started in the insurance business.
All right. Now, when you look back at the time that you spent in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you learn from it?
Well, I think you learned a lot, because first of all, you matured as a 18-year-old guy, 19, 20 years old, and you sure got for example, I didn't realize that the Southerners were so, say, against the niggers. They call them niggers.
Yeah.
And one of my buddies was from Alabama. He said, well, they're only niggers, you know. What do you mean? They're human beings, just as their skin is different. Well, that's the way he says. We lock them up at night and let them kill the people that they want, do the things they want. If they come into our part of the city, well, they got to act like us. You know, just as though they're just a smaller breed, you know, a different breed.
Yeah.
It was sad, but I never realized that. You know, I was brought up in Grand Rapids where we had a Christian atmosphere, and we respected blacks as well as whites, yellows, reds, you know. But that's one thing I learned. But you learn a lot of other things too. You learn that not everybody is like you in your beliefs. And I was shocked one time when one of my buddies came back from a Saturday night and said he met a girl and he shacked up with her. My buddy here doing things like that, you know, I never heard of that. Anyway, those are some of the things you learn.
Now, did you learn things that kind of helped you in your career, just in terms of dealing with people?
Well, no, when you're in a group like that, with such wide, let's say, backgrounds and abilities and characteristics and personalities, you're bound to pick up things. You know, you learn, you don't like this and you don't like that, and you learn life, you know. It's a wonderful experience, really, except that it's war, and that's not the best way to learn these things.
Sure. All right. Well, it makes for a very good story, so thank you for taking the time to share it today.
You're very welcome.